as well. This building did not exist. We were above the drama department, which was very flamboyant. It was a good combination. We were pre-digital, if any of you can get your heads around that. We studied on typewriters. I was just telling Paddy and Simon, I had a nostalgic memory driving up here. When we used to do our exams in the Great Hall, and we'd all take our typewriters, and we had to type our exams. And, you know, when you hit the carriage return, it would make a hell of a noise. It was like thunder. And the smell of Tipex hanging in the air as we all tried to correct our mistakes. But, and there, you know, there was no internet. There was I think the electric typewriter had barely come onto the scene. Photography was all analog. That was fascinating, working in a darkroom. But anyway, I got a degree in journalism, then I did an honours. My first main job was in radio, funnily enough. I did actually fail a year of radio. That's because the lecture was very good. But I worked at 702, Radio 702, which I'm sure all of you have heard about in Joburg. And we covered the first democratic election, which was an amazing thing to work for a talk station during that very, very exciting time. Then I went on to, I decided to change from radio into print. And then I joined the magazine field and started working for a variety of publications. But then I got a job for Sawubona magazine. Also, I'm sure many of you will know it, SAA's In-Flight magazine, the one in the seat properly in front of you. And that was amazing because that was about 2002. It was also the first, it was a BEE company. It was South Africa and Airways' first forays into Africa. Because previously, because of apartheid, the airline couldn't fly into other countries due to sanctions. So that was really fascinating. And then after that, I went freelance. And I've worked for most of the top publications in the country, most of the magazines, most of the newspapers, Fair Lady, True Love, Getaway, Mail and Guardian, Business Day. Then I decided on the back of that to hone myself into a travel field. So I'm probably better known for travel journalism than for wider journalism. I just loved doing that, and I still do a lot of it. Most of the books that I've written previously have been in the travel field. Anyway, you can ask me anything about that just now. The book, Student, Comrade, Prisoner, Spy, is set in Grahamstown in the 80s. I arrived here when I was 17 years old, joined the journalism department and joined NUSAS. I don't know if any of you know what NUSAS is. It was then the National Union of South African Students. And interestingly enough, black students and white students organized separately at the time. It must be very hard for you to picture it. But we lived student lives very much like I imagine you guys lived. There were probably less cars. And I got involved in anti-apartheid politics on campus and off campus. We used magazines like Rodeo, where we used to call him Simon Pamphlet Bomb in those days. Simon worked on Rodeo with me. Many of the people in the mainstream media today were my colleagues then. Ray Hartley, ex-editor of the Sunday Times. Gosh, there are far too many names to mention. But it was a very different political milieu, as you can imagine. Very repressive. We were hounded by the security police. There were narcotics cops in town. I mean, there was a heavy police presence all around the town and obviously on campus as well. Even if you got caught with a packet of Rizzlers, the cops would lock you up. They still do. Hide your Rizzlers anyway. Then we worked alongside colleagues and comrades in the townships surrounding Grahamstown and the Eastern Cape. Because we were white students, we were able to drive around quite freely. We did a lot of media work for people. Silk screening, if any of you know what silk screening is. I think the photostat machine only came in kind of halfway through my time here. We used Roneos. I think the telex was a slightly later development. But, so we knew a lot of, I, in my capacity as a student activist, travelled a lot around these areas, Adelaide, Bedford, Uitenhage, Cradock, we got to know in person the Craddock Four, who were later assassinated by the security forces just outside Port Elizabeth. And that was a turning point in the South African struggle, because it was the first time at their funeral there was just this incredible mass anger around the country. It was the first time that the ANC flag was run around a stadium, and the South African Communist Party flag was run around the stadium in defiance. That led to the first state of emergency, which was declared in what was known then as the PWV, basically kind of Greater Gauteng, and then the Eastern Cape. And it rained down fear and loathing. A spotlight was erected on Settlers Monument Hill. You can imagine this huge spotlight that's powerful enough to pick up any activity in the townships, any gathering of more than 5 people, and the cops would go in there and break it up. The streets were lined with Caspers and Rattles and Nyalas and cop vans and white Corollas that the security police drove. It was an intensely terrifying time. Out of all the political detainees in this country during that time, a third came from the Eastern Cape. So these jails were full. The way it worked is people would be rounded up en masse, sent to various police stations, and then taken to the different prisons. The white detainees, female detainees, we were held at Alexandria Police Station down the coast, and then we were taken to North End, which was a most peculiar prison. It's an old Victorian prison, like red stucco polished floors and high ceilings, and it was like a very strict boarding school. Then I was involved in a detainee swap. They told me I was being released, and then when I got downstairs they said actually we're just joking, and then they took me to Fort Glamorgan in East London. So I spent a total of 3 months in detention, and upon my release I discovered that one of my best friends, colleagues and comrades and fellow student that I'd been working with was a spy for the South African Security Police. Her name was Olivia Forsyth, and she wrote a book about her experiences last year. I think it was last year? Yeah. Our Agent 407 was her handle. And she basically betrayed a lot of the white students at the time, put most of us away with the information she gave over to the cops. So 30 years later or so, I decided it was time to tell the story. And that's basically the bare bones, the brushstrokes of the book. Please try and read it. I think you'll love it, because you're students. I think there'll be a lot of resonation. I think there'll be a lot of parallels as well. It's incredibly interesting and sad and frustrating for me to come back here and see what's going on with students at the moment. I fully support the fees must fall. I don't support the violence, but the parallels are the timing is amazing. What else can I say about it? I don't know, I think we should just throw it open for discussion. Go ahead and ask anything. If you want to ask anything about the writing and editing process, by all means. If you want to ask about the content of the book, or anything from those days.
My name's Sarah. Thank you for speaking to us about this. So obviously there was a huge time span between when you wrote the book and when you were living the experience. What kind of resources were you drawing on to get that information back out into the open?
Okay, so research-wise, what did I do? Basically, what happened was when you read the book, you'll understand it more. But I had a horrific flashback to a violent atrocity that I'd witnessed at the time when I was a student, and that spurred me on to wanting to write about the past, to try and understand the violence I'd seen and my own experience in detention and the betrayal of the spy. So basically what I did was I approached a publisher and I said, this is a synopsis of the book, this is what I intend to write, and they gave me the go-ahead, and I came back to the Eastern Cape. So I did the sentimental journey. I went back to, well, obviously Grahamstown. I went back to Fort Glamorgan jail. That was bizarre in the extreme. Then I went back to Port Elizabeth, and I went to Craddock. I went to a place called Post Chalmers, where many of the activists were disappeared in those days. It was a basically the end of the road. Ghastly place. It's now an abattoir, all things. So I went, it's just outside Craddock. It was the place where the Pepco 3, they were community activists from Port Elizabeth in the time. They met a grisly end there. Simpiwe Mtukulu, who was the president of COSAS, that was the Congress of South African Students, he was first poisoned over a period of months. He also met his end there. Forensic teams went into that place and started uncovering evidence, and it's an incredibly haunting place. But so the research was based on a quite lengthy road trip, and then I started obviously talking to people that I knew from the time, who had all moved on. Some are in PE, some are out the country, some are in Washington, some are in Brisbane, whatever. And I think it was through collective memory, because my memory was shot. And I think because, you know, your life moves on. You don't carry that stuff around with you all the time. But when I started scratching away at some of the memories emerged, and when I started talking to other people, then things came back to me. So it was a very interesting, it was a hard process. It was very interesting, it was very emotional. I think it's a little bit like Dorothy Parker. She's a writer from the 30s, was she? 40s? She said, I hate writing, but I love having written. And it's very much the sense of that. The writing this was excruciating. I had to go on holiday all the time. But it's done and it's out there, and there it is, yeah.
Thank you.
Bridget, I went to your book launch on Thursday.
Yeah.
Wednesday, yeah. And I was here yesterday for the seminar. And one thing that I'm still asking myself was that, okay, you were a student activist back then, but what did you and other comrades at that time do? What were you doing to fight injustices, and what have you done post your days at Rhodes?
Okay, how we basically worked is that our task was to try and conscientize other students on campus. So there was a massive right wing at that time. Zimbabwe had just become newly independent, and there were a lot of very angry young white guys who fought in that war who came to Rhodes, I think because they could afford it. But basically our job was to try and raise awareness on campus amongst students here, to lend support to the anti-apartheid cause. So we did, practically what we did was meetings. We would go into the different reses and we would talk to students and try and explain to them, you know, the situation. We did posters and pamphlets, so we would produce media. And I mean, the campus was posters everywhere. There was always a bit of a poster war. Guys would come and rip them off and we'd put them back up again. We had demonstrations, we had mass meetings. We rallied particularly in the sort of middle 80s around, it was called the End Conscription Campaign. And we were trying to get white guys to say, listen, you shouldn't go to the army, you don't register, don't go and fight. Because effectively what was happening is that as the situation got worse in the country, white guys were being pulled into the townships and shooting against their own black South African brothers. And so we were trying to raise awareness around that. We had a hell of a lot of meetings. We had more meetings in the first 4 years of Rhodes that I've ever had ever since. And we were disciplined, we were organized. So it was propaganda, conscientizing, all those sort of things. And then as far as outlying areas and working with the community, we got funding to start a magazine called the Grahamstown Voice. It was produced sort of a little bit clandestinely, sort of on the edges of campus. And that we'd get guys in the township to write stories, we'd help them with pictures, and we'd put together a magazine that they would then distribute. Also sort of auxiliary things like the white students often were the only ones who could afford cars. So it would be a lot of driving up and down, fetching people from the airport and taking them somewhere, sort of support services. So that was kind of what we did, if that makes sense to you. And since then, what have I done against apartheid? Well, apartheid ended.
Well, between 1980 something and
Yeah.
1994 at least.
Oh, what did I do?
Yes, at least. Yeah.
Yeah. Gosh, my memory. All right, so I must have finished here in 86 or 7. I left the country briefly for about 2 years, just to get out. That's when I stayed with Paddy Donnelly in London. He was working for the anti-apartheid movement. Was it that or IDA? IDA, the International Defence and Aid Fund. So I travelled quite a lot, and that was when I started getting the idea that I would like to get into kind of travel journalism. And then I came back and worked for Radio 702. So, and 702 was very interesting then. You know, they'd exploited a loophole in the homeland system. You're all aware of the homeland system, how the country was divided into different areas where people had to live according to their ethnic groupings. And they exploited a loophole in the Broadcasting Act, which allowed the homelands to have their own broadcaster. So they went in and they set up a radio station in the homeland of Botswana. And so we had like an official radio station there, but we actually broadcast out of Joburg. And it was really funny because above our desks we all had to have a picture of Lucas Mangophe, who was the head of BOP. And we had to broadcast a certain amount of hours actually from BOP. So the station had a chopper and they'd ferry somebody out there every other day to do the sort of required hours of broadcasting. And it was the country's first talk radio station. The very first day I joined, there was a bomb scare. So we all had to run away from the studio and go down. Of course, we all went to the pub. And then came back on again. There was a lot of, it was a very, what's the word, very polarized. But it was the first time that people in South Africa really had to could express their voices through radio. Anybody could phone in, and the guys would take any call. So you'd often have someone from Soweto going head to head with someone from, say, Vicksburg in the Free State. And people argued. They screamed and they shouted and they let it all out. And it was an amazing process to witness. And then we carried on through the first elections. One of my enduring memories was a woman called Constance Mabopani. Constance, something like that. And she was 90 years old, and this was the very first time she voted. And she called into the radio station. We were all in tears because she said, "I'm giving birth to a new baby today." And it was so powerful and so emotional because 702 sent all the reporters out, you know, into the queues and into the townships and into the rural areas. It was really powerful reporting. So yeah, and then I stayed on for a couple of years after that, and then fled the coup.
Okay. This is your 9th book, according to what you said. So I would like to know, how long did this take you, the writing? And does it get easier? You know, because I'm trying to see the first time you did the first writing, I've gone through some ordeals and things like that. So comparatively, does it get easier down the line?
Well, yes, it does. I think it gets easier. It's like the harder you practice, the luckier you get. You know, there is a discipline in writing. You have to put in a certain amount of hours every day. This book took about 2 years from start to finish.
2 years?
Yeah, but I wasn't writing every day. You know, obviously the research is a big part of it.